Arab executive's newborn cried nonstop at the train station, until an African woman did the impossible. The grand station echoed with voices, footsteps, and the endless rumble of trains, but one sound cut through it all, a newborn's cry that wouldn't stop. The child belonged to one of the wealthiest Arab executives in the city, a man used to commanding boardrooms and bending the world to his will. Yet in that crowded station, surrounded by strangers, he stood powerless, cradling his tiny baby as the cries grew sharper and more desperate. No one dared to approach him, until a woman from the shadows stepped forward. She was poor, unknown, invisible to most, but what she did next would silence the cries and change both their lives forever. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring you more powerful stories of resilience, love, and the moments that remind us of what truly matters. It all began on a winter afternoon, as the executive's world collapsed into the sound of his baby's unstoppable tears. The station smelled of iron and dust, the kind of place where thousands of footsteps had worn the stone floor smooth, where every whistle of an arriving train felt like a reminder of how busy and how lonely life could be. Amid the chaos, a single sound rose above it all, a newborn's desperate wails. Adil al-Farouk, one of the wealthiest Arab executives in the Middle East, stood in the middle of that station with a crying baby pressed tightly to his chest. His tailored suit was spotless, his shoes gleamed, and yet his face carried a helplessness that no amount of money or power could erase. He was a man used to controlling empires, oil companies, banks, sprawling developments across 2 continents. But that day, in the echo of the train station, his empire meant nothing. He rocked the baby back and forth, whispering in Arabic under his breath, but the child screamed louder, its tiny fists clenched, its face red with strain. People stared. Some whispered, others simply walked past, pretending not to see. Few dared to approach a man of his stature, though most recognized him from the newspapers and screens. To the public, Adil was a man of stone, cold and commanding, a billionaire untouchable by ordinary concerns. But there, with his child in his arms, he looked human, terrifyingly, vulnerably human. Adil had always believed he could buy solutions to any problem. He had hired the best doctors when his wife fell ill, but they could not save her. He had purchased the grandest crib, the softest clothes, and even commissioned a private nurse for his newborn son. Yet the nurse had not arrived that morning, and for the first time, he was left alone with the child. The cries had started quietly in the car, but by the time he stepped into the station, they had become relentless, drawing the attention of everyone around him. His driver tried to take the child, but Adil had refused, clutching his son tighter. "He is mine," he muttered, almost defensively, though no one had questioned it. Now the baby's screams echoed like accusations in his ears. "You can build towers of glass and steel, but you cannot calm your own son. You can command thousands of employees, but you cannot soothe a child of blood and bone." The weight of failure pressed down on him harder than the stares of the crowd. He sat on a wooden bench, loosening his tie, his mind racing with panic. He thought of his late wife, how she would have known what to do, how she would have cradled the baby and quieted him with nothing more than her heartbeat. Adil felt a lump rise in his throat, the ache of grief mixing with his helplessness. And then she appeared. She came from the far end of the platform, walking slowly at first, almost unnoticed. Her clothes were worn, her coat patched in places, and her shoes were scuffed from years of use. She carried nothing but a small bag slung over her shoulder, her dark skin glowing softly under the pale light of the station lamps. Her name was Amina, though Adil would not learn it until later. At first, no one paid her any attention. She was just another face among the poor who drifted through the city, invisible to those too wealthy to see suffering. But as she moved closer, her eyes fixed on the crying child, something in her step changed, purpose, quiet determination. Adil noticed her only when she stopped a few feet away. He stiffened immediately, his protective instinct flaring. No one dared to stand so close to him without permission. "What do you want?" he asked sharply, his accent rich, his tone commanding even in his exhaustion. Amina didn't flinch. Her eyes flicked from his face to the baby's, her gaze soft but steady. "Your son is hungry," she said simply. The words hit him harder than he expected. He blinked, caught off guard, because no one else had dared to name the problem out loud. He had formula in the car, bottles prepared, but in the storm of panic, he had forgotten. Shame burned his chest. Adil frowned, adjusting his hold on the baby. "I know what he needs," he snapped, though his voice lacked conviction. Amina tilted her head, unconvinced. "If you knew, he would not still be crying." The truth in her words stung. For a moment, his pride battled his desperation. He wanted to send her away, to remind her of who he was, of the power he held. But another scream from his son tore through him, drowning out his pride. "What would you have me do?" he asked, his voice low now, almost pleading. Amina stepped closer, her movements calm and deliberate. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small blanket, worn but clean, folding it over her arm. "Let me help," she said. Adil stared at her, uncertain. He had spent his life distrusting strangers, guarding his wealth and his name. Yet there was something in her eyes, a steadiness, a quiet strength, that made him hesitate. For the first time in hours, he felt the faint possibility of relief. His hands trembled as he looked down at his child. Could he trust this woman, a stranger in a station, someone who had nothing to lose? And yet, what choice did he have? The baby cried louder, as if answering the question for him. Finally, Adil exhaled, his shoulders sagging under the weight of defeat. He extended the child toward her, his voice breaking as he whispered, "If you can, please." Amina's hands were gentle as she took the newborn, cradling him with practiced ease. She hummed softly, a tune older than the walls of the station, her voice carrying a warmth that wrapped around the child like a second blanket. Slowly, impossibly, the baby's cries began to fade. Adil watched, stunned, as his son's fists unclenched, his face relaxed, and his tiny breath steadied against the stranger's chest. The impossible had happened. The station that had been filled with wailing was now silent, except for the faint hum of her song. In that silence, Adil felt something break open inside him. For years, he had believed money was power, control was safety, and pride was everything. But in the hands of a woman the world overlooked, his child had found peace that he, with all his wealth, could not give. And for the first time in his life, Adil al-Farouk felt powerless in a way that humbled him. The newborn's cries had vanished, replaced by the rhythmic hush of Amina's humming. The cavernous train station, moments ago filled with tension and whispers, now seemed to pause in awe. Strangers who had avoided Adil's gaze were now staring openly, their eyes fixed on the poor African woman who had managed what the billionaire executive could not. Adil's heart pounded as he watched. He had stood before presidents, negotiated billion-dollar contracts, and controlled empires, but never had he felt so insignificant or so indebted. The shame that burned in his chest was joined by a strange sense of gratitude, though pride forced him to remain silent for the moment. Amina adjusted the blanket around the baby with ease, swaying gently as though she'd done this countless times before. Her dark eyes never left the child's face. She whispered something in a language Adil didn't recognize, soft words that seemed to calm the baby even further. Finally, unable to contain himself, Adil asked, "Who are you?" Her gaze flicked up to him, calm and steady. "Just someone who knows what it is to be needed." The simplicity of her answer unsettled him. He was used to people defining themselves by status, titles, or wealth. Yet this woman offered no credentials, no explanation, just a quiet certainty that felt stronger than any boardroom negotiation he had ever led. Adil straightened his tie, trying to reclaim some authority. "You work with children?" "I worked with mothers," Amina said. "Back home." "Back home," he pressed. Her lips tightened, and for a moment he saw a flicker of pain cross her face. "Sudan," she answered finally. "But home is far away now." Adil studied her. She looked no older than 30, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had lived 3 lifetimes of hardship. Her coat was threadbare, her shoes nearly falling apart, yet she held his child with a gentleness money could never buy. The baby shifted in her arms, making a soft sound before settling again. Adil felt a knot in his throat. He had been terrified moments ago, powerless against his son's cries. Now, watching the child sleep so peacefully, he felt something else: envy. "You've done what I could not," he admitted, his voice quieter than he intended. "Even with all my resources, all my help, I failed." Amina shook her head. "You didn't fail. You are grieving and the child feels it. Babies know more than we think." The words pierced him. Grief, yes, it was always there, lingering like a shadow. His wife's death only weeks after childbirth had ripped his world apart. He had buried himself in work, believing he could buy normalcy, buy peace. But the truth was there in Amina's words. His son had inherited his sorrow, and it poured out in wails neither of them could contain. Adil swallowed hard, fighting the emotion rising in his chest. "And what do you know of grief?" he asked, though his tone was more curious than accusing. Amina's eyes clouded. "Enough." For a moment, they said nothing. The trains came and went, people bustled around them, yet it felt as if the world had shrunk to just the three of them: the grieving father, the fragile newborn, and the woman whose calm defied both sorrow and chaos. Finally, Adil spoke again. "Why did you help me? You could have walked past like everyone else." Amina looked down at the baby, brushing a finger across his tiny hand. "Because once, I had no one to help me. And I swore if I ever saw someone in need, I wouldn't look away." Her words were simple, but they landed with the weight of truth. Adil felt his pride fracture further. He had built his life on self-sufficiency, never needing anyone. Yet here he was, at the mercy of a woman who owned nothing but her compassion. The baby stirred again, and Amina instinctively adjusted her hold. Adil realized with sudden clarity how natural she was, how she moved as though the child belonged to her. And in that instant, a strange fear crept into him. "You could take him," he said, his voice sharper now. "Just walk away and no one would stop you." Amina blinked, startled by the accusation. "Why would I do that?" "Because he's everything," Adil whispered. "He's all I have left." Her expression softened. "And that is why I would never take him. You don't see it yet, but he is safe with you. He just needed someone to ease the weight until you are ready." The sincerity in her voice disarmed him. For the first time, Adil's defenses crumbled completely. He sank onto the bench, elbows on his knees, burying his face in his hands. The image of his wife flashed before him, her smile, her touch, her laughter. He had promised her he would take care of their son, but he had no idea how. Tears came, unbidden and unwanted, falling hot against his palms. He didn't care who saw. For once, Adil al-Farouk, the man known for his unshakable composure, allowed himself to break. When he finally looked up, Amina was standing silently, still cradling the baby. She hadn't moved closer, hadn't spoken. She had simply waited. And in her quiet presence, he found something he hadn't felt since his wife's death: hope. He stood slowly, wiping his face. "Thank you," he said, the words heavy with sincerity. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Amina nodded. "You don't have to know everything. You just have to love him enough to try." Her words lingered in his mind long after she handed the baby back into his arms. For the first time, his son didn't resist him. The infant nestled against his chest, sighing softly, as though Amina had passed some invisible strength into them both. Adil looked at her, truly looked, and realized she wasn't just a stranger. She was a reminder that no amount of wealth could replace human connection, that even the most powerful needed the touch of the overlooked to heal. And as the train thundered into the station, shaking the ground beneath their feet, Adil knew this moment was not the end, but the beginning of something he could not yet name. The platform emptied as trains came and went, but Adil lingered, his newborn pressed quietly against his chest. For the first time since his wife's death, the child slept soundly in his arms. Yet Adil knew the peace wasn't his doing, it was hers. The woman who stood a few feet away, quiet, still, as if unsure whether she should stay or disappear back into the crowd. Her name echoed in his mind. Amina. He'd finally asked before the last train pulled in, the name rolling unfamiliar yet comforting across his tongue. Adil approached her cautiously, his voice softer than before. "Where are you going?" Amina's eyes lowered. Nowhere. I was only passing through. There was something in the way she said it. A practiced vagueness that told him she had no real destination, no place to call her own. He studied her coat again, the worn edges, the patches carefully stitched by hand. Her shoes, scuffed to the bone. A woman surviving, not living. Adil shifted the baby in his arms, suddenly aware of the contrast between them. He, with wealth that stretched across continents. She, with nothing but a bag and her resolve. Yet she had given him what no fortune could. "Come with me," he said impulsively. Her eyes shot up, startled. "Excuse me?" "I can't explain it," he admitted, shaking his head, "but you calmed him. You calmed me. I need that." Amina hesitated. "I'm not a nurse. I'm not looking for work." Adil almost laughed at the irony. Everyone he met was always looking for work from him. Partnerships, contracts, opportunities. She was the first person who wasn't, and that only deepened his conviction. "I don't need a nurse," he said. "I need someone who understands what I don't. Someone who can see beyond the numbers and schedules and wealth. Someone like you." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "And if I refuse?" Adil shrugged, though his voice betrayed a hint of desperation. "Then I'll thank you, and you'll disappear. But I'll never forgive myself for letting you walk away." The silence stretched, heavy, as Amina searched his face. Finally, she nodded once. "I'll come. But not for money." His brow furrowed. "Then why?" She looked at the baby, now stirring gently against his father's chest. "Because he needs it. And maybe you do too." The car ride back to Adil's penthouse was surreal. Amina sat quietly in the back seat, her bag on her lap, while Adil's driver stole glances at her through the rearview mirror. It wasn't every day that his employer invited strangers into the fortress of wealth that was his life. When they arrived, the stark difference between her world and his hit her like a wall. The building rose like glass carved against the sky, the lobby gleaming with marble floors and gold accents. Guests turned their heads as Adil entered, their eyes flicking curiously to the woman who trailed behind him in her worn coat. In the elevator, Amina finally broke her silence. "You don't have to parade me here. I can help the baby without being seen." Adil glanced at her, his jaw set. "I don't parade. And I don't hide." The doors opened into his penthouse, a sweeping expanse of luxury, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, velvet couches, a grand piano no one had touched since his wife's death. It was a palace in the sky, and yet it felt cold, empty. Amina looked around, her brow furrowing. "It's beautiful," she said softly, "but lonely." The words pierced deeper than she knew. Adil didn't reply. Instead, he led her to the nursery, an immaculate room filled with expensive furniture, soft blankets, and toys that had never been touched. The baby stirred again, whimpering softly. Instinctively, Amina stepped forward, taking him from Adil's arms. She didn't ask permission this time, she simply knew what to do. Rocking him gently, she began to hum the same tune from the station. Within moments, the child was quiet. Adil watched in silence, a strange ache tightening his chest. How had this stranger become so essential so quickly? "You belong here more than I do," he muttered without thinking. Amina looked up sharply. "Don't say that. This isn't my world." "It could be," he said, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to convince her or himself. But not everyone was convinced. By the next morning, whispers had already started among the staff. The housekeeper avoided Amina's gaze, muttering in Arabic under her breath. The driver, loyal but cautious, pulled Adil aside before breakfast. "Sir," he said carefully, "forgive me, but bringing her here, people will talk. They will wonder why a woman like that is living in your home." Adil's face hardened. "A woman like what?" The driver hesitated. Foreign. Alone." The implication was clear. She didn't belong in the world of billionaires and skyscrapers. But Adil's jaw tightened in defiance. "She saved my son. That is worth more than your whispers." Still, doubt began to gnaw at him. Could he protect Amina from the scrutiny of his world? Could he protect himself from the questions that would inevitably come? Later that evening, as the city lights glowed beneath them, Adil found Amina on the balcony, gazing out over the skyline. The wind tugged at her coat, her hair catching the faint golden light of the towers. "You're not afraid of heights?" he asked, stepping beside her. "I've lived with worse fears," she replied simply. He studied her profile, the strength etched into every line of her face. "You don't belong in the shadows," he said. "Not anymore." She turned to him, her eyes steady. "And you don't belong in loneliness. Yet here you are." The word struck him harder than any deal lost, any empire threatened. For the first time, Adil realized this wasn't just about his son, it was about him. About the hollow life he'd built, filled with wealth but empty of warmth. And as Amina's gaze held his, a new fear rose in him. Not of scandal, not of whispers, but of losing the one person who had brought light back into his world. That night, as he lay awake with his son asleep beside him and Amina's hum still echoing faintly in his mind, Adil knew a storm was coming. Because the world would not accept her place in his life. And yet, he wasn't sure he could live without her. By the third day, the city already knew. Adil Al-Farouk had always been a subject of fascination for newspapers and tabloids alike. A billionaire widower, powerful and mysterious, the kind of man whose life was dissected in glossy magazines. But now, photographers camped outside his glass tower, hoping for a glimpse of the woman who had dared step into his home. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. The staff's whispers became bolder, the air heavy with judgment. Adil noticed the sidelong glances, the abrupt silences when he entered the room, the way conversations stopped when Amina passed by carrying his son. He had expected resistance, but the speed of it unnerved him. Still, he tried to ignore it. At night, when his son lay peacefully in Amina's arms, Adil felt a calm he hadn't known in years. The grief that had hollowed him out since his wife's death seemed to soften, replaced with something fragile but undeniable. Yet peace was short-lived. On the fourth evening, his sister Layla arrived unannounced. She swept into the penthouse in a swirl of perfume and silk, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. Layla was beautiful and fierce, a woman who had navigated the cutthroat social circles of Dubai with ease. But tonight, her eyes were blazing. "Adil," she snapped, bypassing any greeting. "What is she doing here?" Amina stood near the nursery door, the baby nestled against her shoulder. She stiffened but did not move. Adil's jaw tightened. "She is helping." "Helping?" Layla's voice rose. "Do you realize what people are saying? That you've brought in some street woman to replace your wife? That you're parading your grief in public? This is humiliation, Adil." Her words sliced through the air. Adil stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "She saved my son when no one else could. She gave him what all our money, all our doctors, could not." Layla's eyes flicked to Amina, narrowing with disdain. "And you trust her? A stranger? You don't even know where she came from." Amina shifted uneasily, her arms tightening around the baby. For a moment, Adil saw the flash of old wounds in her eyes, the familiar sting of being dismissed, unseen. "Enough," he said sharply. "If you came here to judge, leave." Layla's jaw dropped. "You would choose her, over your own blood?" Adil's voice cracked with fury. "I would choose the one who brings peace to my son. If that makes me a fool in your eyes, so be it." The silence that followed was deafening. Layla turned on her heel, her earrings glinting in the chandelier light. "You will regret this," she hissed before storming out, the door slamming behind her. That night, Adil found Amina standing by the window, the city lights glowing beneath her. She was swaying gently, still holding the baby though he was already asleep. "I'm sorry," Adil said quietly, stepping closer. "For what?" she asked, her voice steady. "For what you endured tonight. For the way my family, my world, will see you." Amina's gaze remained on the horizon. "It is not new to me. In every place I've been told I don't belong." His throat tightened. "But here you do." Finally, she turned, her eyes meeting his. "You say that now. But what happens when your empire trembles? When your reputation is threatened? Will you still believe it?" Adil wanted to answer, but doubt gnawed at him. He had spent decades building a life of iron control, where every decision was calculated, every appearance flawless. Could he withstand the storm that Amina's presence had already unleashed? The baby stirred, letting out a soft sigh. Amina kissed his forehead, her voice low. He doesn't care about your wealth or your power. He only cares that you're here. That you try. Adil's chest ached. I don't know how to try, he admitted, the words tasting bitter. Not the way you do. You will, she said softly. But only if you stop fighting yourself. The next morning, the whispers turned into headlines. Billionaire widower seen with mystery woman. Is this the new mother of Adil Al-Farouq's child? From poverty to penthouse. Who is she? The tabloids were relentless. Photographers shouted outside his office, demanding answers. Investors called, their voices tight with concern, asking if his judgment had faltered. Even his board of directors began circling, their patience thin. Adil sat in his office that afternoon, the skyline of Dubai stretching endlessly beyond his window. His phone buzzed with messages he didn't want to read. He closed his eyes, rubbing his temples. When he opened them again, Amina was there. She stood quietly in the doorway, not intruding, simply waiting. You shouldn't be here, he said hoarsely. The world is already sharpening its knives. Her voice was calm. Let them. You've faced worse. Not like this, he whispered. I can fight businessmen, politicians, rivals. But this is different. They are attacking what little I have left. Amina stepped into the room, her presence grounding. Then fight differently. Not with power. With truth. Her words echoed in him long after she left. He thought of the station, of her steady hands cradling his son, of the silence that had fallen when she began to hum. She had done the impossible, not just for the child, but for him. And he realized, with sudden clarity, that the true danger wasn't the whispers or the headlines. It was losing her. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Adil made his choice. He stood before the press outside his tower, cameras flashing wildly, microphones thrust toward him. His suit was impeccable, his expression unreadable. But when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of something more than wealth. It carried conviction. My son was born into grief, he began. And in my pride, I believed I could shield him from it. But it was not money or power that gave him peace. It was compassion. It was kindness. It was a woman the world overlooks. The crowd murmured, stunned. I owe her my gratitude, Adil continued, his eyes steady. And if the world chooses to see that as weakness, then let it. For I would rather be judged for compassion than praised for pride. The flashes erupted, questions shouted, chaos swirling. But Adil stood firm, unshaken. Because in that moment, for the first time since his wife's death, he wasn't afraid. The press conference had ended, but its impact rippled far beyond the crowd of flashing cameras. Adil returned to the penthouse with the weight of the world pressing on his shoulders, yet something inside him felt lighter. He had spoken the truth, not the carefully scripted lines his advisors would have crafted, but words from his soul. For the first time in years, he had let the world see his heart. When he stepped inside, Amina was waiting. She stood in the living room, the baby in her arms, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched until he finally spoke. I told them about you, he said quietly. About what you've done for me. For him. Her brow furrowed. And what did they say? He let out a weary laugh. They said everything you'd expect. That I've gone mad. That I've let grief blind me. That I've allowed a stranger into my life without thinking. He paused, stepping closer. But for once, I didn't care. Amina shifted the baby, her eyes fixed on his. Why? Because they don't understand, he said, his voice breaking slightly. They don't understand what it means to wake up in the middle of the night, powerless, holding a crying child, knowing that all your money and power mean nothing. They don't understand how it feels to see your son finally breathe in peace, because someone had the courage to step forward when the rest of the world turned away. Her lips parted, but no words came. The baby stirred and settled again, as though sensing the tension. Adil stepped closer still, his eyes locking onto hers. I defended you because you saved me, Amina. Not just my son. You reminded me of something I had forgotten, compassion. Humanity. Her eyes glistened, but she shook her head. I didn't do anything extraordinary. Yes, he whispered. You did the impossible. The room fell silent again, save for the faint hum of the city outside the windows. Adil's gaze lingered on her, the quiet strength in her posture, the gentleness with which she held his son. And in that silence, he knew he could no longer fight what had been growing between them since the station. I want you here, he said firmly. Not as a guest. Not as someone the staff whispers about. As part of this home. Amina blinked, startled. Adil. I know what people will say, he continued, cutting her off. They will mock me. They will accuse you. They will invent stories because they cannot accept something simple and true. He drew a shaky breath. But I don't care anymore. My empire means nothing if I return every night to an empty house. My reputation means nothing if I cannot give my son what he truly needs. And what he needs is you. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling before she could stop them. She turned away, her shoulders trembling. Do you know what you're asking? Do you know what kind of life this will be for me? For him? The world is cruel to women like me, Adil. It will be worse if I stand beside you. He reached out, gently touching her arm. Then let them be cruel to me instead. I have faced men with armies of lawyers and fleets of bankers. I can face the whispers too. But I cannot face losing you. Her breath caught. For a long moment, she said nothing, her tears falling silently onto the baby's blanket. Then, slowly she turned back to him. You're not the man I expected to find at that station, she admitted softly. I thought I would hand your son back and disappear. I never imagined you'd see me. I see you, he said, his voice steady, certain. More clearly than I've seen anyone in years. The baby stirred again, his tiny hand reaching upward, brushing against Amina's chin before curling into a fist. She kissed the child's forehead, then looked back at Adil with eyes full of something she had tried to bury, trust. Then I will stay, she whispered. Relief crashed over him like a wave. He stepped forward, wrapping his arms around them both, holding them tightly against his chest. For the first time since his wife's death, he felt whole, not because someone had replaced what he had lost, but because life had given him something new, something unexpected and profound. The three of them stood there, bound together not by wealth or power, but by something stronger, the fragile, unshakable thread of love born in the most unlikely of places. Outside, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm, cars honking, lights flickering, skyscrapers gleaming. The world would keep talking, keep judging. But within the walls of Adil's penthouse, there was only silence, only peace. Adil pressed his lips against his son's head, then looked at Amina, his voice a vow. This is our beginning.